Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. Happy 2017. And I have come up with the perfect gift. People love this guy. He does what's called predictive linguistics, and he goes out on the internet and he uses billions and billions of pieces of data and information, throws out a lot of them, but he comes up with predictions based on what he data mines off the internet. I am talking about Cliff High from Half Past Human. Cliff High, thanks for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com. And I hear you got a bunch of new data to spit out here right at the beginning of the year.
That's correct. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's nice to start a year this way, especially a year that has such auspicious data chunks to chew on. Okay, let's we're going to have to sort of divert here. I was going to show this later, but your question is just so easily answered with this weird chart I've developed. And I say weird because it's not like everybody else's chart that you might see in a financial or even on your show, the charts that have been presented in the past on your show. This one is a little unusual because it deals with the emotional state of what we call USA Pop, the subset of the global population that is bounded by the United States. And this is covers three areas: our politics, the financial system, and what we're calling the discovery in our report. But I'm suggesting very strongly that from 2017 onward, that our friend, mutual friend here, Bill Holter, I think his truth bombs are going to start coming on out, and it's not going to be limited to just the economy. And so we're going to get something that we can describe in a loose way as disclosure that woo-woo is moving into a more dominant consciousness or awareness in our consciousness period from this point onward. And so
in other words, aliens are real.
Oh, that's old news.
Okay, all right.
I mean, that is so prosaic.
Okay.
As to be, not.
In other words, aliens are controlling us in some way. How about that?
Sure. Yeah. That and it may even be stranger than that. Where and a lot of this stuff is going to come out of what we're calling the discovery, simply because it's going to make such a huge difference to humanity over these next 30, 40, 50 years. In our reports, it's describing a world that we don't actually live in right at this moment, but that we're transitioning into. If accurate, if these predictions are accurate, they appear to be developing that way, especially around those things that are not manipulated. The actual appearance of climate, weather, the appearance of new property, new lands rising, all of these are forecast. The rain bombs, the lakes and rivers in the sky that suddenly dump out on us, the sudden freezing of whole herds of animals, all these things were forecast years before they occurred within our data sets and described. Now, following that same woo-woo trend of basically science fiction, and that's what we called this report, was sci-fi world, because we're going to be getting into a world in which the past expectations of even things like physics or weather or climate cannot be relied upon to be persistent into the future. And so our future is going to involve a re-looking at a human history that'll go back 7,000 years, that's going to upset a lot of people whose thinking is so rigid that they're not going to be able to accept the developing reality around them. And we also are suggesting that a lot of this is going to come from this discovery that has already occurred in Antarctica, probably occurred 20 years ago, and we're just now going to start hearing about it over these next few years. We now have physical, political, economic evidence that a lot of our forecasts about Antarctica. Now, bear in mind something that I need to point out. When I first started my reports, the very first run I ever did, focusing in on trying to make money on the stock market, two things came up that absolutely shocked me. One of them was the sun, the big scary ball in the sky. The other was Antarctica. It was all through, both of those were all through that first data set. From that point on, I was so intrigued, I forgot about the stock market stuff and went out in the woo-woo world. But now we're getting to the point where the data is saying woo-woo is going to start kicking ass and taking names. It's going to start dominating, that we're going to start seeing the real information about where our trillions of missing dollars are slowly percolate out. We're going to see new inventions pouring out all over the place as they've been officially allowed to, because we need them now. And a lot of this is going to pivot around whatever it is that's been discovered in Antarctica. And I think the giant pyramids that are 3 and 4 times the size and in one case maybe 20 times the size of the largest pyramid in the Giza Plateau. I think these pyramids in Antarctica contain stuff that's going to tell us a lot more real information about our history than we could ever imagine. And I also think these pyramids go back to the other half of this precessional cycle, and maybe all the way even through it. So at least in the order of 12,000, if not 21,000 years. And so our ideas of who we are, how we came to be, and what we need to be thinking about as humans are actually involved in this report in a way I never anticipated. Let me also state that when I go into doing the interpretation in these reports, I don't really have a clue as to what we're going to be looking at other than those dominant sets that may have appeared in previous reports. So I go to look to see what's happening in USA POP, but it can change from month to month to month. We also had this weird situation develop in our work here that took about 5 years to mature. And I discussed it over the period of time in radio interviews and even wrote articles and stuff about it. And it was what I called this context change. And that occurred in the early 2000s. I couldn't figure it out. I just knew there was something big coming. We were all going to reel under it, but I couldn't get a handle around it linguistically. But it was going to change the context around a lot of words that we ended up using. Long story short, it turned out to be the undocumented workers coming out and saying, we're here, we're not going to go away, you got to deal with us. Basically, you've got to change your context of thinking and deal with us as real humans in the here and now, not gloss us over with all of this paper illusion, so to speak, that we don't exist. And so that context changed for USA POP. That's a huge mass of population, 350 million people. And their mental structures, whether they were an undocumented worker or not, they all had to change. We all had to reshape our thoughts around that language to embrace what had just happened. This context changed. In our data sets, it ran 18 months before I talked about it, and then I talked about it for probably another 18 months before the first parts of it matured. We're in the midst of one of those right now. Only it started way back before I even started this work, probably.
With Antarctica, with all, the president going down there, Kerry going down there, other dignitaries going to Antarctica. All of a sudden, everybody's going to Antarctica. Bizarre. And you think it has something to do with this big change in thinking about who we are, where we came from, and what technology is really available to us that's going to be pushed out because we need it now.
Correct.
Oh, boy.
It's spooky. It's weird. It's science fiction. It's woo-woo. And there is detail like you wouldn't believe. There was so much stuff about Antarctica, I got sick about looking at it in the data. And it's just going to get bigger.
In other words, you're talking about times when Antarctica, they have maps in the 1500s where they drew Antarctica with no ice on it.
Correct.
And so, I mean, Antarctica is a huge continent, and there's a lot of history there, evidently, that's been covered up with 3 miles of ice.
And there's cities underneath. Right now, there's giant voids in there that are so tall that you can stack the Eiffel Tower on top of itself 3 and 4 and 5 times and not even touch the top of this void. These voids run over long rivers. The rivers are at 60 and 70 degrees Fahrenheit temperature, and they've melted the ice and created these giant warm air-filled pockets that run throughout all of Antarctica. They're just now talking about them.
And you think there are people living there, or aliens, or somebody?
Something. There's old civilization down there. There's stuff that's been under the ice that is showing up in our data sets as affecting our technological future. Basically, from 2017 onward, we're seeing this stuff leak out. Now, in our language, we have a lot of release language now about Antarctica, in the sense we've got a lot of people wondering, basically, as we just said, why Kerry? Why did the popes go down there? Why did Obama go to Patagonia and then sneak over there? Why are all these people going to Australia and then sneaking over to Antarctica? What possible reason could Obama have to go and look at ice in Antarctica? He knows what ice is like. He swirls it around in his drinks. He's from Hawaii. He's just not the extreme sport loving fellow. And even Kerry, who rides a bicycle and, that kind of thing, and does at least exercise at a serious level, he's not your extreme sport, let's go out and climb mountains for the fun of it kind of a guy. So why did he go there on the critical day for his party's election? That kind of thing. So it gets really spooky when you start reading our reports. So if you're going to buy our report and you're going to think it's all about the economics of it, at one level you're correct, because that affects all of us, and we're all living in a depression. But also there's this whole woo-woo component that's really bubbling to the surface. Now, part of this is, I was just going to bring this up. It's going to sound really strange, but if you're as old as I am, you remember this movie called 2001: A Space Odyssey.
Yes, Hal.
Correct. But all of that, forget all about that. Go back to the beginning of the movie that wasn't the ape man. Okay. It was these people that were digging up a obelisk. And we see the obelisk on Earth, and then with the ape people, and then we see them digging it up on the moon. Excuse me. What we're getting now is data sets that would basically describe people digging something up in Antarctica that is solar system effective, so to speak, solar system involving, and in order, so we're not even really getting the pictures of the people digging in terms of the descriptions. What we're getting is descriptions about the massive logistic effort that's going to take greater than 10 years to do to build out bases in Antarctica and Patagonia to get down into Antarctica to start getting the wealth out of whatever it is they found. We've got data sets in there that are suggesting, and it can be totally wrong, can be totally screwed, okay? Very rarely has that happened, but it did occur once. But we could be really wrong on this, but the data sets are suggesting that whatever the discovery is down there is going to be a source of wealth for the greater part of humanity for perhaps hundreds of years. So a staggering kind of a find. And we're not talking about a big patch of oil. We're not talking about a resource in the sense of a big chunk of gold. The data sets have actually described this stuff as not precious metals, but precious technology.
I'm Greg Hunter. Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. We're going to go off the beaten path today, way off the beaten path. We're going to go down to Antarctica. I know it sounds bizarre, but a lot of people been going to Antarctica. Big, important people. They've been going to Antarctica recently. They have been going to Antarctica ever since, well, the very beginning of President Obama's very first term. And I compiled a list of headlines for you, so we can anchor this in some reality before we get into a reality and introduce our guest. And I just want to start with this headline. Obama sends Biden on special mission to Antarctica. Look at the date, Huffington Post, 1/22/09. Right after he is inaugurated, for the very first time, President Obama sends Vice President Biden to Antarctica. Don't you think that's bizarre? And now we fast forward to John Kerry, the Secretary of State. John Kerry's Antarctic visit highlights continent and climate policies under threat. That's the New York Times, 11/15/16. This was election day. The date is the date of the article, but this was election day. He was asked all kinds of questions about it. It was very squirmy on it, very Weasley. Didn't really want to give a lot. Wanted to just talk about climate change. 11/15/16, Putin to visit Antarctica. This is the Moscow Times, 1/18/17. Patriarch Kirill, this is the Russian Pope. This is after the first meeting of the Roman Catholic Pope Francis, and they haven't met in 1,000 years. Patriarch Kirill meets penguins at Russian base as he becomes first Orthodox leader to visit Antarctica. That's the Daily Telegraph, or the Telegraph in 2016. Secret Nazi military base discovered by Russian scientists in the Arctic. This is the UK Independent. This is something equivalent to, the New York Times or Washington Post. Secret Nazi military base discovered by Russian scientists in the Arctic. And this is in the Independent. And then let's just go over here. This is the Governor General's historic visit to Antarctica. This is the Governor General of Australia, February 4th, 2013. And last but not least, Buzz Aldrin, who is a Freemason, is medically evacuated from where? Antarctica. Listen, Antarctica is not on the way to anywhere. The president can't, fly to the Middle East and say, oh, I think I'll stop off in Germany. Antarctica is a place you can go to that is the size of, you could probably fit it right into the continental United States and Canada. It's a continent. It's a huge landmass. And you can only get to Antarctica by going through Patagonia or through South America, the tip of South America, the Drake Strait, I believe it's called, or go to New Zealand and go that way. That's the way Kerry went through to Antarctica. So why am I saying all this about Antarctica? Well, folks, to me as a reporter, a former mainstream media reporter, something is going on. And and I looked for somebody who could come on and say, what do you think is going on? And our next guest is a 25-year talk show host. He is the author of 11 books, two of which are have to do with Antarctica. He's got also a documentary film producer. He is a precious metals dealer. He's first dealt with the Antarctica, actually Nazis in Antarctica. Probably people thought he was crazy back in 2005, and now it's out in the mainstream press. Nazis in Antarctica in 2005. His latest book has come out just in December of 2016 called Empire Beneath the Ice, How the Nazis Won World War II. Now, this is an artist rendition. This isn't a real picture of a flying saucer, but you get the point. This is Empire Beneath the Ice. This is the latest of 11 books by, and let's bring him on, Steve Quayle of stevequayle.com. Steve Quayle, I know it was a very long introduction, but thank you for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com.
Well, Greg, this is a delight for me to come on and to share with your viewers just why Antarctica is in the news and in the headlines to the degree it is. It was left kind of as just that ice base south of South America. But what most people don't understand, and this is critical, is that in 1947, the United States sent a war flotilla to the Antarctic under Admiral Byrd, and it was called Operation High Jump, and it was to seek out and to destroy the hidden Nazi bases that intelligence agencies had provided them the documentation for. It wasn't a small thing, 13 ships, 4,700 men, and the state-of-the-art, if you will, advances in U.S. weaponry. The bad news is we got our rear ends kicked, and in 1947, it was actually February, the thing started in August of 46, ended in 1947, Admiral Byrd came back and reported to Congress what had happened. The Russians, incidentally, had made a video, because they were spying, of our aircraft encountering flying saucers. Now, in order to put this into perspective, two of the heads of NASA, which is our National Aeronautic and Space Administration, were former Nazis, very prominent scientists.
Operation, and just how did that happen? And let's just go ahead and tell people a program called Operation Paperclip, where we were in a rush to beat the Russians, to go into Germany and take their scientists and bring them over to America to help with our warfare, Defense Department, and advance our technology. Correct?
Absolutely. And when you deal with Hermann Oberth and you deal with Dr. Werner von Braun, and Hermann Oberth's famous statement is, think not that we Germans were brighter than any other scientists. We had help from other worlds. And that's interesting because, over the years...
That was actually, and just so you know, I just want to kind of bring this in here, because I don't want people... we talked about this in the very pre-interview, that I don't want people to think you're crazy, Steve Quayle. You're not crazy. I would never put you on if I thought you were. And many people are fans of yours and do not think you're crazy. Some people may. But that quote that you gave was a quote that I heard for my own ears on the History Channel. I heard that quote that you just gave. So go ahead. I interrupt you. Go ahead.
No. Operation Paperclip, but there were 7 other operations under the same thing. We brought in, for instance, even the Japanese weapons designer, Dr. Ishii, ISHI. So that was the plan of Western intelligence to bring it in. So let's get back to the Antarctic. When Admiral Byrd came back, he had the first Secretary of Defense on his side to tell the American people what was really going on in the Antarctic, and that was Forrestal. Forrestal, again, was the first Secretary of Defense, and when he was wanting to tell the American people what they had found through Operation High Jump and the advanced technology, he was thrown out a 3rd-story window at Bethesda Naval Hospital. So when you're dealing with the Antarctica and you're dealing with the history of the Antarctica, it is steeped in absolute, not only mythology and, let's just say this, mythological references, but in the 1500s, even the Piri-Reis map showed Antarctica without ice. Now, that basically comes into total conflict with the modern geologic time frame of glaciation. So what really is going down there? And here's the billion-dollar question, probably trillion. Why are the world's religious leaders and the world's most powerful leaders going to the Antarctica? I don't think Kirill the Russian Orthodox Patriarch is going down there to, just basically meet penguins. And with no disrespect, man, someone or something, and it's both, has summoned the world's leaders, both political and religious, to the Antarctica. And I believe that based on Admiral Byrd's testimony, the testimony of multiple generals, multiple intelligence people. I've been on talk radio, Greg, 25 years, and I couldn't know what I'm sharing with your audience unless someone told me. So I don't know everything, but I certainly know what they've told me in reference to Antarctica.
I want to get into, so you think that there are actual beings, actual people there living in their, quote, empire beneath the ice, and you think they are summoning world leaders down there for a face-to-face? Because they certainly don't want to email end up at WikiLeaks.
Absolutely. And the interesting thing is that this goes right along. We were talking in the time before we went live that even Francis Bacon in the 1627 in his New Atlantis was referring to ancient technology that, by the way, he didn't get to finish the book, but ancient technology that was astounding, from genetic engineering to skyscrapers, laser weapons. I mean, this is in 1627. So what we're dealing with is the idea, Greg, that there is an advanced civilization. Now, I want to clear up something. There are those who believe that we were created by aliens. I'm not on that bandwagon. The Anunnaki, I'll make this easy, just the simplest statement. The Anunnaki are the fallen angels. That's who's represented in all the Sumerian presentations, on their stelae, on their drawings and their clay tablets, everything. But the Bible talks about fallen angels. Now, why is that so important? Because we're dealing with the time where we're going to see a universal religion, a universal government, and a universal monetary system. And now, after we watch Davos, now everybody wants to take the cash away from America. Obviously, they're doing a trial run in India. But it's as if all of the world's leaders, and especially the most prominent religious leaders, are having to answer to someone who has superior intellect, superior intelligence, but a very, I would say, dark and sinister future for the world. In other words, global control of everything and everyone. So that's who I believe is summoning everyone down there. Now, listen, why are these people here? The biggest announcement that's getting set to come, the Vatican is already prepping the way that if there are aliens, can they be baptized? My answer is no, they're not created in the image and likeness of God. My answer to those that say, well, God's a figment of your imagination, the aliens created us, then my simple statement is, who created them? And for the record, we're talking about civilizations that, even according to the Sumerian Table of Kings, go back 225,000 years. So I deal with a lot of, I would say, pre-Adamic stuff, meaning prior to the creation of Adam and Eve, 6,000 years ago, there were civilizations on the earth that also got into genetic manipulation. And interestingly enough, so much of it goes back to Antarctica. So I believe it's almost like, if you will, 2001 Space Odyssey. They're not just finding the obelisks on the moon. They're finding the entities, and in my opinion, they're fallen angels. And let me make something clear. Fallen angels, because they are of a different level of creation, don't die. So we're talking about things that can pass on hidden, esoteric, occult knowledge and have to the adepts, those who basically buy the lie, get to do the, if you will, they're brought up to speed on what are called black physics. Black physics are what exists beyond the PhD level of physics. And we're seeing it in CERN. I think what is so critical for people to understand is, as more activity takes place in CERN, the occult rituals associated with it are so in your face that, you can't dismiss this kind of stuff anymore as being, oh, the rantings of this fringe or that fringe. Something is happening, and the Antarctic is critical. It's my contention that because of the advanced technology of the Third Reich, and especially their pharmaceuticals and their finances and everything, and you mentioned Operation Paperclip and their intelligence, that they went under the ice, so to speak, and that they pretty much came into contact with beings, sentient beings, which obviously Herman Oberth and Werner von Braun and others have made reference to so many times until they passed away. So all this stuff is a matter of record, and when you put all the records together, it points to this. There is some entity or group of entities that are sentient, that means obviously the thinking, that have advanced technology, and that basically give orders to the religious and political leaders of our day.
Suggesting very strongly that from 2017 onward, that our friend, mutual friend here, Bill Holter, I think his truth bombs are going to start coming on out, and it's not going to be limited to just the economy. And so we're going to get something that we can describe in a loose way as disclosure that woo-woo is moving into a more dominant consciousness or awareness in our consciousness period from this point onward. And so,
in other words, aliens are real.
Oh, much that's old news.
Okay, all right.
I mean, that is so prosaic.
Okay.
As to be, not.
In other words, aliens are controlling us in some way. How about that?
Sure. Yeah. That and it may even be stranger than that. Where and a lot of this stuff is going to come out of what we're calling.
Welcome to USAWatchdog.com. Happy 2017. And I have come up with the perfect gift. People love this guy. He does what's called predictive linguistics, and he goes out on the internet and he uses billions and billions of pieces of data and information, throws out a lot of them, but he comes up with predictions based on what he data mines off the internet. I am talking about Cliff High from Half Past Human. Cliff High, thanks for joining us today on USAWatchdog.com. And I hear you got a bunch of new data to spit out here, right?
The discovery, simply because it's going to make such a huge difference to humanity over these next 30, 40, 50 years. In our reports, it's describing a world that we don't actually live in right at this moment, but that we're transitioning into. If accurate, if these predictions are accurate, they appear to be developing that way, especially around those things that are not manipulated. The actual appearance of climate, weather, the appearance of new property, new lands rising, all of these are forecast. The rain bombs, the lakes and rivers in the sky that suddenly dump out on us, the sudden freezing of whole herds of animals, all these things were forecast years before they occurred within our data sets and described. Now, following that same woo-woo trend of basically science fiction, and that's what we call
the beginning of the year.
That's correct. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's nice to start a year this way, especially a year that has such auspicious data chunks to chew on. Okay, let's we're going to have to sort of divert here. I was going to show this later, but your question is just so easily answered with this weird chart I've developed. And I say weird because it's not like everybody else's chart that you might see in a financial or even on your show, the charts that have been presented in the past on your show. This one is a little unusual because it deals with the emotional state of what we call USA Pop, the subset of the global population that is bounded by the United States. And this is covers three areas, our politics, the financial system, and what we're calling the discovery in our report.